Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on hotel management agreements. My name is Bob Lannon. I'm an attorney in Washington, D.C. at Lannon Legal PLLC, and much of my practice is focused on the hotel and lodging industry. Today's presentation is the second in a series of presentations on legal relationships and transactions within the industry. Here's the slide that I used for the first of those presentations, which is on my firm's YouTube channel. It's a lengthy presentation in which I talk about most or all of the persons in this diagram and their relationships. I won't repeat that here. I do want to focus on these persons. These are the major players within the industry. By the way, in all of these presentations, I'm assuming that many of my listeners have little to no experience in the hotel and lodging industry. I know some of you do, but I want this to be an informative presentation for those who are new to the industry. So if I'm repeating things you already know, please bear with me. I'll begin with the owner. The owner of a hotel owns not only the real estate, but all of the personal property in the hotel, as well as intangibles such as the accounts receivable and contracts and goodwill. The owner, if it's a branded hotel, and many hotels in the United States are branded, the owner has a franchise agreement with the owner of a brand, say a Marriott or Hilton or IHG. If it's a Holiday Inn Express, for example, there's a franchise agreement here between the owner of the real estate and IHG Hotels and Resorts for Holiday Inn Express. Today, however, we're going to talk about the hotel management agreement, which is with the other major player, the management company. Many management companies nowadays are third-party management companies. Some of them are affiliated with the franchisors, the big brands, I should say, and we'll get into that discussion a little bit later. But most hotel management contracts today are with independent operators, so there'll be two distinct relationships here between the owner and the franchisor, and between the owner and the management company. A subject of later discussions will be the relationship of the lender to all of these entities, and I won't go into it now, but in too much length. But there are loan documents that govern the lender's relationship with the owner, and there are other instruments that reinforce the lender's protection by creating relationships between the lender and the brand company or the franchisor and the management company. But today we're going to start by talking about hotel management agreements. And by the way, this will be the first of a series of discussions on hotel management agreements. Today I'm just going to talk about the parties, and I'll use later discussions to pick up on talking about the nature of their relationship. But today it's just going to talk about who the owner is and who the manager is. And I'll start with what is the hotel management agreement, and to be very basic. The hotel management agreement is the primary contract governing the relationship between the owner, the entity that owns the hotel, and the management company that operates the hotel. So who are the parties to this contract? Well, we begin with the owner. The owner under the contract is usually what we call a single purpose entity or special purpose entity. So what is an SPE? Well, an SPE is an entity that only holds one asset, and that's the hotel. And so if you've got a company that holds a bunch of hotels, typically it holds each hotel in a business entity, usually a limited liability company these days, although not always. Sometimes it's a corporation or a partnership or some other business entity. And that business entity or that SPE only holds that hotel. And it's that business entity that is party to the hotel management contract. Now, who are these parent entities, or who stands, even if the parent entity doesn't hold multiple SPEs, chances are the parent entity is going to hold an SPE that holds the hotel, and that would certainly be my advice in order to limit the potential liability to the ultimate owners of the enterprise. You want to have that intermediate entity. So who's up here? Well, this could be a high net worth individual. It could be a family. It could be a fund that manages people's investments. It could be a publicly traded company. It could be a private company. There are any number of parent entities that own hotels in the United States today. Sometimes a hotel is held in what's called a real estate investment trust, or REIT structure. So what is a real estate investment trust? Well, it stems from certain tax laws of the United States under which certain entities that hold real estate are given tax advantages if, and only if, under certain rules, which we call the REIT rules, they limit their involvement in the management of the business that operates within that space. So you'll have a tenant entity that leases from the landlord, and the landlord gets its income in the form of rent. It really can only be rent, or else the landlord loses the tax advantage for the income coming from that rent. And so what hotel companies will do to take advantage of these laws is they'll have multiple entities. I'm going to use my arrow here. They'll hold the real estate in the fee owner, but then they'll have an affiliate, another wholly owned subsidiary of the same hotel company that owns the tenant entity. And they'll create a lease here between those two entities. And the tenant entity will enter into a hotel management company with the unaffiliated hotel management company. So the hotel management company, however, is at a disadvantage without what's called an owner agreement, because it'll have this HMA, that's an abbreviation for hotel management agreement, with a tenant that doesn't own any real estate. Its only asset is a leasehold and a lease that could be terminated. And if the management company wants to have its contractual rights backed up by an entity with some assets, so they'll enter into an owner agreement, which is really a guarantee that extends to the fee owner of the real estate and backs up or guarantees all of the obligations of the tenant entity under the hotel management agreement. And that's what's called a REIT structure. And then the owner, the quote unquote owner under the hotel management agreement, will be a tenant that actually doesn't own the real estate or doesn't hold title to the real estate at all. So sometimes that's the owner. A couple other things I want to say about owners. Owners under the hotel management agreement, quote unquote owner, is defined to include not only the current owner, but successors in interest to the owner. And particularly when you're talking about hotel management contracts with branded management companies, these have long terms. Some of them are 40 years or longer, and they're designed to outlast the period of ownership of any single owner of the property. And what it'll do, the contract will say, as a term and condition of the contract, it'll say that the owner is not allowed to sell the hotel to a buyer unless the buyer is approved by the management company and the buyer signs or takes assignment of the hotel management agreement and steps into the shoes of the seller. Really, it's only the branded management companies that have the bargaining power to demand that, but it's important that you know that if you're doing business with them, because the contract is intended to last beyond a single owner. I also want to talk about asset managers. And hotel management, or hotel for a hotel owner, is ostensibly a passive investment, but owners often do get very hands-on, and so they'll hire asset managers to do it. And if you're talking about a large institutional owner, they'll employ people as asset managers who are employees of the owner and who work in asset management departments. If the hotel is owned by a smaller company or a family, and then they may hire a third party to act as an asset manager under what's called an asset management agreement. And that's usually for a cut of the top line. It's often 1% of the gross revenues of the hotel are paid to the asset manager in exchange for supervising the management company on behalf of the owner. So that's the owner. I want to talk about the management company. That's the second party to the management agreement. And here, often as with the REIT structure, now I won't say often, from time to time, as with the REIT structure, the management company may do business through a single purpose entity. I'm actually seeing this more often than I used to. And there'll be, say, an LLC that's a wholly owned subsidiary of the larger management company whose only role is to operate this one hotel. And that limits the liability of the management company under the hotel management agreement. Now, if I'm representing the owner in that relationship, I'm going to want a guarantee here. And it's not automatically offered. But I do find that when I represent owners and ask for that guarantee, I get at least a limited guarantee, and sometimes a guarantee of all of the obligations of the hotel management company that runs from the hotel owner to the parent company. I want to talk about the differences between branded and independent management companies. As I mentioned, the branded management companies are affiliates of your big brand companies like Hyatt and Hilton and IHG and Marriott. And the independent management companies, there are many of them. Some of them are very large, like Aimbridge. Aimbridge is the largest management company, I believe, of any kind, branded or non-branded, in the United States or in the world, indeed. And then there are smaller management companies as well. And even with the big management companies like Aimbridge and Sage and Crestline, they don't have as much bargaining power as the brands do to negotiate long and complex hotel management agreements. So an HMA with an independent operator, it's usually about 35 pages long, I'd say, on average, where if you're talking about a full-service hotel, an HMA with, say, Marriott or Hilton, including all the exhibits, it could be well over 100 pages, and because there's just a lot more complexity to it. There's a difference not only in between the bargaining power of the two entities, but much of that extends from the level of investment. The brand companies often can contribute what's called key money, and key money it's compensation up front that becomes part of the owner's capital stack, or what the money that they invest in developing the hotel. And it's in exchange for a commitment to a much longer term, 20, 30, 40 years. And it'll typically amortize over the first term of a contract, let's say 20 or 25 years, where if for some reason the contract is terminated, a portion of that money, in proportion to that, the unused term, needs to be paid back. There are also manager credit enhancements. Manager credit enhancements might be a guaranteed level of performance, and that will make it easier for the bank to lend money to the owner to develop the hotel. And items like that give the brand companies more bargaining power to have terms that are more favorable to them. I mentioned one earlier, the requirement that the HMA follow the hotel if the hotel is sold. You don't typically see that with non-branded management companies. You do see it with the branded ones. I also mentioned the length of the management agreements. Even think the fee structure, which I'll talk about in later sessions. The brand companies have more bargaining power to demand incentive management fees and fees for above property services than the non-branded management companies have. The brand-related components of a hotel management agreement you'll find in the management contracts with the large brand companies. And these are terms that relate to intellectual property rights, say the hotel's participation in system-wide marketing programs, all of the things you would find in a franchise agreement if the hotel were not managed by the major brand. Those terms will be in the hotel management agreement itself if the hotel is managed by the brand. By the way, I'll pause here and say that there was a time when some management companies, including one of the particular large branded groups of companies, they would, if it was branded, there would be two contracts. There would be a hotel management contract running from the brand to the owner and a franchise agreement from the brand to the owner. You don't see that anymore. I haven't seen it in years. Those companies now have consolidated that. So if the brand is operating the hotel, it's all, the relationship's entirely governed by the hotel management contract. But you do sometimes still see what are called springing franchise agreements. And that gives the owner an option after a certain number of years, and maybe it's tied to a performance test, maybe it's not, maybe it's just after the first X number of years in the term, at the owner's option. If the owner decides that it would rather have the hotel run by an independent management company, it can exercise that option, and then a franchise agreement is said to spring. And that franchise agreement may be pre-negotiated and attached as an exhibit to the management contract, or the parties may simply agree that if and when that happens, the terms of the franchise agreement will be those of the brand's then current franchise agreement that it uses for everybody, that's attached to its franchise disclosure document at that time. But what will happen is the HMA, the management contract, will terminate when the owner exercises that option, and it'll become a pure franchise relationship. And of course, then there'll have to be a third-party management company that comes in and takes over. And then lastly, I want to talk about the amount of control the owner has over the enterprise. That too can vary between branded and non-branded management companies. For example, and I'll talk about this in a later talk, there's what's called the FF&E reserve. It's a reserve account that's maintained to save money to be used to replenish or repair fixtures, furniture, and equipment. Under a branded hotel management agreement, the management company is going to control that reserve. But under a non-branded hotel management agreement, the owner may have enough bargaining power to say, no, we're going to hold that reserve. You're going to forward those funds to us, and you can keep a book reserve, but we will control that money. Also related to the FF&E reserve is what it's used for. If it's a branded management company, typically it can only be used for fixtures, furniture, and equipment. Under a management agreement with a non-brand managed company, an independent management company, often the owner has more discretion to use that money for capital expenditures, which the brands tend to resist. They'll want capital expenditures to come out of the owner's own funds, independent of the FF&E reserve. The brand company, if it runs the hotel, it's there on site and has more discretion to enforce its system standards by drawing money out of that reserve than the non-branded company does. They just have less incentive. Then the brand company has more incentive and more discretion also to assess above property charges for things like initiatives to change the bedding across a brand or a new marketing program. The brand, if it's controlling the hotel, simply has more control and greater ability to reach down into the owner's assets and spend that money for those programs than the non-branded management company has. So anyway, that's some discussion of the major players to the hotel management contract. In the next session, I'm going to talk about different structures of the relationship between those parties to a contract. So I look forward to the next session, and thank you for attending this one.